We are doing a series of videos titled Do All Religions Lead to God? And we are trying to answer particular questions as to whether all religions are the same. Do they all teach the same things? Do all religions lead you to God? Do all religions provide you with salvation? And so on. In the previous video, we were discussing commonalities among religions. And we discussed that the doctrine of God, the doctrine of cosmology, the doctrine of human beings, the doctrine about society, the doctrine about human problem, the doctrine about salvation, the doctrine about life after death, the doctrine concerning ethics. These and many other doctrines are common to all religions. Now, what we're going to do in this video is discuss the differences among religions. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare these doctrines among different religions, and we're trying to answer the question, are all religions teaching us the same thing? Let's begin, number one, with the doctrine of God. Let's compare what Hinduism says with what Islam says about the doctrine of God, and then introduce Christianity's teachings as well in the equation and find out whether all these religions are teaching us the same thing about God. Now, this study can be done in multiple ways. We can compare the character of God mentioned in these different religions, or we can talk about the approach of God towards humanity in terms of transcendence and immanence towards human beings. But what we're going to do now is compare the doctrine of God in these different religions as far as number is concerned. Now, in Hinduism, you have different kinds of beliefs about God. For example, there is the polytheistic belief about God, the belief that multiple gods exist, and each god is over a particular field or a particular area. So there is a goddess of wealth, there is a god or goddess over education. When you are going to start a new business or an enterprise, you approach a different kind of God. So the acceptance of a plurality of gods, multiplicity of gods, the view of polytheism is present in Hinduism. In Hinduism, we also find certain people emphasizing monotheism. And they believe and assert that ultimately there is only one God, and all these plurality of gods that are found in Hinduism are actually different manifestations of that one God. So that's how they reconcile the polytheism with the monotheism. There is then henotheism within Hinduism, the belief that my God is this and there are other gods that exist as well. My family has a particular God, my tribe has a particular God, but there is no lack of emphasis or acceptance of other gods that exist. In Hinduism, we also have the view of atheism. Charvaka philosophy, for example, is atheistic in nature. The view that nature is all that exists, matter is all that exists, and there is ultimately no God at all. So within Hinduism, you have polytheism, you have henotheism, you have atheism, you have monotheism, and you have other isms as well. Now let's compare this with the view in Islam, which is the view of absolute monotheism. I emphasize the word absolute because not just is there an emphasis on just one God, Islam does not allow even the possibility of plurality within the Godhead. There is no second to him. He is absolutely one, and therefore absolute monotheism. Let's add the teaching of doctrine of God, of Christianity into this realm. Christianity believes in a Trinitarian monotheism, which means that we believe in one God who exists in three persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Now let's compare these three religions and what they have to say about God. Now, if what Islam says about God is correct, absolute monotheism is correct, then what Christianity says about God, Trinitarian monotheism, is wrong. Because in Trinity, you have three persons within the Godhead. Now, if what Christianity says about God is true, then what Islam says about God is then not true. Let's compare it with Hinduism as well. If monotheism is correct, then atheism is obviously wrong. If atheism is the right view, then all the other beliefs in God are false. What's my point? My point is that the doctrine of God is a commonality among all religions. But when you get to comparing the doctrines of God in different religions, you find that they are speaking different things about the number within the Godhead. Character and all of that can be a discussion for a later time. So all religions are not teaching the same thing about God. Let's move on further to talk about the doctrine of man in different religions. Let's start with Hinduism. In Hinduism, we have at least two views about man. If you are a follower of the Advaita philosophy, which is a non-dualistic philosophy, also called monism, you are starting with the assumption that there is ultimately only one reality, and that one reality is the Godhead or the Brahman. There is no second reality. What we think of as creation or what we think of as individual human beings are not individuals or not creation. They are in fact Godhead itself. So the human problem, according to Advaita, is that human beings do not see themselves as God. And therefore the solution to that problem is the enlightenment that I am God. Aham Brahmasmi. That means I am God. That's the solution to the human problem. So look at the view about human beings within Advaita philosophy of Hinduism. The view is that human beings equal to God. Now within Hinduism itself, you have a creation story in Rig Veda, which speaks about different castes of people coming from different parts of Brahman. For example, the Brahmins come from the mouth of Brahma, and therefore they are the spokespersons for Godhead, for the Lord, for God. And therefore they act as priests and prophets for God. Now the Kshatriyas are born from the hands of Brahman, and therefore they act as the kings and rulers of society. The Vaishyas come from the legs of the Godhead, and therefore they serve as the peasants, the business people, and other works within society. Shudras come from the feet of the Godhead, and therefore they serve all the other communities within the Godhead. My point being that within Hinduism itself, you have two views of human beings which are different and even contradictory to each other. If you look at the Bible, the book of Genesis chapter 1, we read of all human beings being created in the image and likeness of God. What is the point that I'm trying to bring forward? The point is this: doctrine of man is present in all religions. But what different religions have to say about the doctrine of man is not the same thing. They speak different things, even contradictory things about the value and the worth of human beings. If you move forward to discussing the doctrine of society within different religions, you find the same thing. Based on the doctrine of man, you can have doctrines of societies, and different religions teach us different doctrines about society. The questions that we are trying to answer is, are all religions the same? Do they teach the same things? And the conclusions that we are coming to, even as we go through the process, is that though there are commonalities among religions, all religions are not teaching us the same things. In fact, they're teaching us contradictory things. If one is true, then the other cannot be true. That kind of contradiction. Let's talk about one particular issue that is common to every religion, the doctrine of human problem. And if you look at different religions and what they have to say as to what is wrong with human beings, you find that they have completely different views about what is wrong with human beings. If you look at Christianity, the problem with human beings is the problem of sin. The penalty of sin, the power of sin, the presence of sin, and so on. That's the human problem. Of course, human beings have different problems. The problem of poverty, the problem of illiteracy, the problem of sicknesses and illnesses, and so many other problems exist among human beings. But every religion identifies the human problem. And the Christian perspective about the human problem is that the problem is the problem of sin. Now, if you ask the Advaitin within Hinduism, what is the problem within humankind? Their response would be that the problem is that human beings are ignorant. Ignorant of what? Ignorant of the fact that they are actually gods. And therefore, that's the problem. Ignorance is the problem with human beings. It's not sin that is the problem with human beings. It's ignorance that is the problem with human beings. Within another branch of Hinduism, if you ask them what's the human problem, they would say that human beings are stuck within a cycle of births and rebirths. Birth, death, and then rebirth. Again, birth, death, and rebirth, and so on. So you are stuck in this cycle, and that's the human problem. And so if you ask the Muslim as to what is the problem with human beings, they would say that the problem with human beings is non-submission to Allah. In other words, that human beings are disobedient to and rebellious to Allah. That's the human problem. And therefore, when you look at what these different religions teach us about what the human problem is, you find that what they ultimately say about the human problem is completely different and sometimes even contradictory to each other. Let's move to the doctrine of salvation in different religions. In the previous video, I mentioned that the doctrine of salvation is usually based on the doctrine of the human problem. In other words, the solution always has to be based on the human problem, right? In Christianity, since sin is the human problem, Jesus Christ, the Savior, is the solution. He took away the penalty of our sins. He is purifying us from the power of sin through sanctification. And one day, sin will be no more. The presence of sin would also be cast away. So salvation has to do with, from the Christian perspective, solution to the problem of sin. Now, within Hinduism, since there are multiple human problems, there are multiple solutions as well. According to Advaita, since ignorance is the human problem, the solution to the human problem, or the salvation according to this particular branch of Hinduism, is enlightenment. Your realization of the self within you. You're recognizing the fact that I'm in fact Brahman. That enlightenment is the solution to the human problem according to Advaita. Now, if you ask a Muslim, that would be completely wrong, because human beings are created beings and they can never be equated with God. Now, within another branch of Hinduism, there is the belief that there is different births and rebirths, and so moksha or salvation is getting out of the cycle of births and rebirths. Now, how do you do that? Different people have different ways to solve this problem. One of the ways that they suggest is you be devoted to a god, the bhakti marga, the way of devotion. Devotion to a particular god can get you out of the cycle of births and rebirths. There are other ways as well. What am I trying to point out to us? The point is that even though the doctrine of salvation is common to all religions, what different religions say about the human problem and what different religions say about salvation is completely different from one another, even contradictory to one another. Let's talk about the end times or life after death. Again, if you come from an Advaitic perspective and if you are someone who has achieved enlightenment, you merge into the Brahman, you become Brahman. That's your existence. That's your afterlife. Now, from a Hindu perspective, if you have not achieved moksha, what happens to you after death? You are reborn as some other human being or some other animal, or you have some other kind of existence. You are within this cycle of births and rebirths. Within the monotheistic religions, what happens after death is you either are expecting heaven or you are expecting hell. There is a final judgment that determines where you go and so on. Even though there is that commonality among monotheistic religions, who gets to go to heaven and who gets to go to hell is different in Islam and Christianity, for example. The criterion for judgment is different. What you experience when you get to heaven or you get to hell is different. My point being that even though life after death is a commonality among all religions, Different religions have different views about what happens to life after death. Now, let's ask ourselves particular questions. I want to introduce a book written by a professor by the name Mark Heim. He's a professor of Christian theology at the Yale Divinity School, and he has written a book titled Salvations, in the plural, and the subtitle is Truth and Difference in Religion. And the argument that he makes through this book is that different religions point to different salvations. And that's why the name of his book is Salvations, plural, because different religions are pointing you to different kinds of salvations. And I think similar kinds of books can be made with human problems or societies or gods, because different religions are speaking differently about each of these issues. What he is saying is that all religions are not basically teaching you the same thing. They're not teaching you the same thing about salvation. Pluralists believe that all religions can provide you with salvation. And Mark Heim's question would be, which salvation are you talking about? If all religions provide you with salvation, is it the Advaitic kind of salvation where you come to the self-realization that I am Brahman, I am God? Or is it the salvation proposed by Christianity, which is a problem to the problem of sin? Or is it a salvation proposed like moksha, where you get out of the cycle of births and deaths? In other words, when people say all religions provide you with salvation, a legitimate question to ask is, which salvation are you talking about? Because Mark Heim, through his book Salvations, is telling us that different religions have different concepts about God and salvation. Now, when we ask these questions, are all religions the same? We have to note, number one, that there are commonalities among religions, but that there are huge differences also among religions. So all religions are not the same in the sense that they do not teach us the same things. Now, question number two, do all religions provide salvation? The answer is no, because which salvation are you talking about? Salvation according to Islam, or salvation according to Christianity, or salvation that is discussed in different groups of Hinduism? Which salvation are you talking about? How can every religion provide you with the same salvation when the human problem is identified differently? And therefore the question, do all religions lead to God? Now, we must ask ourselves, which God are we talking about? Are we talking about Brahman, the only one who exists and there is no other? Or are we talking about the God that is described in Islam? Or are we talking about the God of Christianity or the gods of other religions? And therefore, the next question, are all religions equally true or valid? We must answer this question carefully, because all religions are not saying the same thing. In many of these, we found out that if one particular view is right, the other views are wrong. For example, if the atheists among religions are correct about the number of God or about the existence of God, then everybody else, the monotheist, the polytheist, the henotheist, and everybody else is wrong. If the polytheist is right, then those that emphasize monotheism, especially those within Islam and Christianity, are absolutely wrong. So are all religions true is a question that we must answer after comparing all these different religions and also acknowledging the fact that different religions teach us different things. Finally, why do people say that all religions are the same? I think there are two reasons for this, and let me point out both of them to us. Number one, most people reduce religion to ethics. They say that religion is all about doing good. It is all about avoiding the bad. It's all about being right. It's all about morals. It's about ethics. They reduce religion to ethics. And the questions that they would ask you is, do not all religions teach you how to do good? Do not all religions teach you how to become better human beings? So they are reducing religion to ethics. Religion is not just about ethics. Religion includes ethics, but religion is about many other things as well. So one reason why people say all religions are the same or they teach you the same things is because they reduce religion to ethics. Another reason why they say all religions are the same is because they have not really studied different religions. It is, they look at the similarities, the superficial similarities among religions and come to the conclusion that all religions are probably the same. All religions speak about God, all religions speak about salvation, all religions speak about life after death, all religions speaks about ethics, and therefore all religions must be the same. But a proper study of different religions would lead us to the conclusion that all religions are not saying the same thing. So most people or pluralists who believe that all religions are the same are assuming that there are superficial differences among religions and they are the same at the core. But the fact of the matter is that there are similarities on the outside, but there are differences at the core of different religions. So in this video, we have been discussing the differences among religions. In the previous video, the commonalities among religions. And in this video, we come to the conclusion that all religions are not teaching us the same thing. All religions are not leading us to the same God or to the same salvation, because different religions have different discussions about gods and salvations. In the next video, we would continue with our series on Do All Religions Lead to God? We would be discussing Bible and other gods, Bible and other faiths.